Hello and a very warm welcome indeed to Quadriga. And all eyes here in Germany are on the big, prosperous and influential southern state of Bavaria, where people go to the polls this weekend in an election that could have a major impact at the national level. The Conservative CSU party has ruled Bavaria without interruption for over 60 years, but that period of dominance looks to be over. There could be two winners on Sunday: the Greens and the populist far-right Alternative for Germany party. So what will it all mean for Angela Merkel and her coalition government here in Berlin? This week here on Quadriga, our question is: Bavaria votes, Watershed in Germany. And to discuss that question, I'm joined by three journalists here in the studio, beginning with Matthew Karnichnik, Chief Europe Correspondent at Politico, who says a poor showing from the CSU in Bavaria is likely to make the party even more disruptive in Berlin and will raise serious questions about the stability of Merkel's coalition. Also with us is Andrea Schalal, senior correspondent with Reuters news agency, who believes that the election will be a referendum on Chancellor Angela Merkel's loveless and fractured ruling coalition. Interesting there, Andrea. And warm welcome to Bettina Festering, a freelance journalist who argues that the election in Bavaria will be a victory for democracy. Interesting too, that comment. I'll begin with you, Bettina. Everybody's saying it's a regional election, it's a state election, maybe not too important, but it could genuinely be a watershed, both for Bavaria and at the national level. What do you say?
I think that's both perfectly true. Obviously, there's an impact in Bavaria if a party that has ruled alone for nearly all of the last 60 years and has never been in opposition gets hammered and seriously reduced in numbers. It will still be in the government, so outwardly, I think perhaps not even that much will change in Bavaria. I think in some ways the effects will be more dramatic in Berlin, because all the ruling coalition of Angela Merkel in Berlin, the parties that it consists of, are set to suffer in Bavaria and suffer badly. That's true not just for the CSU, but also for the Social Democrats. Angela Merkel herself will carry some of the blame for the Bavarian results, and her coalition partners will make sure to try to make her take the maximum of it. And unrest within her own party is growing.
And you said you believe that the vote will be a victory for democracy. What did you mean exactly? Because it's a very positive spin on...
Completely, and I will stand with that. I think on two parts. First of all, I think it's absurd for democracy to be ruled by the same party for 60 years. In that sense, moving closer towards a change of government in Bavaria is good for democracy, and it's also good for the state, because parties that are too long in power get too crusty. But secondly, I think perhaps even more important in this time and this political climate that we have now, I think the CSU in Bavaria is getting punished for being too populist.
Too populist, yeah. Too populist, Andrea, too crusty, the CSU. They've been a cornerstone of German politics for 60 years. Tell us a little bit more about the party.
Well, the party has, had defined itself for many years as not allowing anything to the right of it. So, I remember in the 1980s going during a much earlier Bavarian regional election and seeing campaign posters that were very anti-foreigner at that point, anti-migrant. It's a flavor that the AfD, the Alternative for Germany party, has adopted and has succeeded with since 2015. So the CSU, the Bavarian Conservatives, have shifted a bit, I think, from the perspective of the far-right voters. They have become attracted to this far-right party because they feel that the Conservatives have left that space open. And so they've taken that space. On the other hand, you could say that the Bavarian leader, the leader of the Bavarian party, Horst Seehofer, who's also the interior minister, has pursued a course of attacking Chancellor Merkel over and over again over her policies on migration, and that's had some backlash because there are people in Bavaria, and I know several, who would normally vote perhaps SPD or Green, but have voted deliberately for the CSU to support Angela Merkel and her open-door migrant policy. So therein, too, he's been too harsh, too. So it's been a very difficult period, I think, for the Bavarian Party to sort of find the right course forward. And the victors in the midst of all of this are going to be the Greens, who are doing better than ever before.
Well, we'll talk about the Greens shortly. Matthew, tell us a little bit more about the CSU. What do our viewers need to know about the CSU from your perspective?
Well, I think they reflect the problem that a lot of mainstream sort of incumbent centrist parties in Europe are facing at the moment. And there it's particularly poignant because they've been at the focal point of this migration crisis, as some people call it. And you know, on the one hand, they have this rhetoric, as Andrea said, of being tough on refugees, and they have this tradition of doing that. But in practice, I think a lot of people in Bavaria look at what has happened with migration and the refugee policy over the past couple of years, and they say, well, you know, they talk a good game, but in practice, nothing has really changed in terms of what the CSU has promised in terms of really, you know, tightening things. And, you know, for example, putting more people on the border. They've done that, but they're not really border controls of the kind that they suggested they're going to. It's all sort of small fry. It's a lot of sort of, you know, Potemkin village type of stuff. And I think that, you know, people aren't stupid and they realize that. And that's obviously been an opening for the AfD. And on the one hand, and obviously on for the Greens on the other. So you're seeing, you know, really a fracturing of the landscape. So I agree that, you know, in principle, it's good for democracy not to have one party in power here. But I think that the larger story in Bavaria right now is that you're seeing just how potent this migration issue remains on politics in this country, because this is really what has triggered this. There's no reason that the CSU should be losing in Bavaria right now. The economy is booming. Yeah. Unemployment is below 3%. It's one of the richest regions in Europe, not just in Germany. So, you know, this is why there's this frustration of the leaders, you know, who are running for the CSU, because they don't get it. I mean, they've done everything right, you know, according to their usual playbook, and it's not working. And I think this is what really has to be worrying people in Berlin, and that is why also the CDU, Angela Merkel's party, is so concerned about Bavaria right now.
And, you know, Matthew, I think that part of this is that people have couched the AfD vote, the support for the AfD, as being largely a protest vote. I'm not really sure that's true. I think, you know, what you're saying is like people are voting sort of against their interests. The CSU has led Bavaria to this, you know, incredible wealth. It's very, so something else is going on underneath that level, and that is this sense of discomfort that Germany has with its role as a country of migration, as an immigrant, as a country of immigrants. And that is something that is a flavor that's, you know, whether it's the lack of integration of the Turks, before them the Italians and Greeks who came to work in Germany, the sort of difficulty in integrating those ethnic Germans who came from Russia and Kazakhstan, and now most recently this sense of just feeling completely overwhelmed by the arrival of 1 million Muslims, mostly Muslim migrants from Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan, just not knowing how to deal with that. And that, I think, is part of what, you know, Germany is struggling with writ large.
Well, and in Bavaria, I think that they feel that, you know, in particular, because they're right on the southern border of Germany with Austria, where in 2015, a lot of these refugees, most of the refugees actually came over the Bavarian border. So they have this real kind of fear, a lot of people down there, of the hordes kind of coming up from the south and overrunning the country. And this is what the AfD, you know, has played on fairly successfully.
I'm not so sure that I agree with all of that. I mean, first of all, the AfD in Bavaria is set to get about 12, 13, 14%, which is nowhere what it is getting in Eastern Germany, where there are no migrants, and no migrants came through either. Exactly. So, I mean, this image of hordes coming from the south, I really don't buy into that. I think one aspect which we haven't mentioned so far is that the CSU is being punished, too, for being so difficult in the government in Berlin. People did not like Seehofer, the party head and interior minister in Berlin, to obstruct Merkel on every bit. And also, we have a lot of Bavarians who are good Catholics, and the CSU is called Christian Christian social union. It has a lot of members who are good Catholics and do not like to see that rhetoric unleashed against refugees.
Let me pick up on your first point, and we'll get some images, first of all, before we continue the debate. Let's just talk about the acrimony at national level between CSU, CDU and the other coalition partner, the SPD, if you will. Because certainly the story of the past few weeks here in Germany has been of that toxic rivalry between the two CSU big beasts, party leader and Interior Minister Horst Seehofer, who's already been mentioned, the Bavarian state premier, and wannabe party leader Markus Söder. And that battle has still left Horst Seehofer enough time to indulge in his other favourite pastime, mentioned already as well, the ongoing settling of scores with Angela Merkel. Let's have a look.
Sometimes a look can speak 1,000 words. Horst Seehofer, German Interior Minister and head of the Bavarian CSU, twice drove the governing coalition in Berlin to the brink of collapse and plunged Angela Merkel into disbelief. First, it was over the deportation of refugees along Bavaria's border with Austria. Then, it was over the fate of Hans-Georg Maaßen, the controversial head of the Domestic Intelligence Agency. Seehofer, the stubborn, dyed-in-the-wool politician from Bavaria, where a certain type of man calls the shots. Bavarian state premier Markus Söder is the same type. For years, the so-called alpha males of the CSU engaged in grueling power struggles until Söder toppled Seehofer, who then went to Berlin. Merkel and the Bavarian boys. Is it even about politics anymore?
Bettina, politics, pantomime or personalities there? What have we got?
I think there's a huge amount of personalities involved here. I think Seehofer is a man who is very egocentric and who will bear a grudge until, you know, the day of the last judgment. I cannot see...
He's very much in the twilight of his career, it has to be said.
Yes,
he doesn't have much time now to really get on Angela Merkel's nerves, which seems to be his sort of self-imposed mission in life at this point in time.
He certainly made good use of the last months to lash out at her. There's no doubt about that. No, he's vindictive, I think.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, he dug in on the head of the Domestic Intelligence Agency, Maaßen. You know, he's dug in on these issues. I actually saw him last summer in East Germany. He had one campaign appearance in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, and he used that to talk about how things were so wonderful with Angela Merkel. And although they'd had trouble, they had a lot of respect for each other. But as soon as they got back into a coalition government, it started all over again. It was really just a campaign.
But I think in Bavaria, it's not so much the feud with Merkel that is hurting him, because this is to a degree what the Bavarians expect of their leaders in Berlin, to not sort of, you know, toe the party line all of the time. And Merkel actually is not very popular in a lot of Bavaria, which is why the AfD, for example, has put up posters saying, vote CSU and you'll get Merkel. So, you know, there's a very anti-Merkel tone in this campaign down there, and she hasn't really appeared. I think she's made one appearance during the campaign for the CSU. And I think that the problem that Seehofer and the other CSU people have there is that their big selling point has been always that if you vote for the CSU, you're voting for a party that has a seat at the big table in Berlin. And it's unique in that respect, because if you vote for the Greens, they're tied to a federal party. The SPD, the Social Democrats, the same sort of thing. But that the CSU is the only party that will, you know, represent Bavaria in Berlin. And again, through this refugee crisis and his disputes with Merkel recently, that showed not to be true, that he has been unable to push through a Bavarian agenda in Berlin, and people are noticing that and are very frustrated with the CSU's failure over the past couple of years to do what they promised to do. And I think that's why we're where we are now. And that's also why the Greens are doing so well, because a lot of people, on the other hand, who, you know, might have voted for the CSU previously, more liberal types, have been offended by all of this very aggressive rhetoric that's come from Seehofer and the others recently.
When you talk about the very aggressive rhetoric, the two ladies at the table, to what extent is this about alpha males mentioned in the report never really accepting a female chancellor? Never having developed proper tolerance for a female leader in Germany?
I'm not sure I follow you on this one. I think, Merkel has been in power for 13 years now. She has been able to kill off every alpha male who thought he could come in and dominate her.
Good point.
Definitely.
And, I mean, anybody who's still in power and still somebody in power today knows that she is fierce and that she is ruthless and that she is very skilled and very experienced. And I think that's not the way to go about getting rid of her.
Andrea.
I agree with Bettina, but I think a lot of what's happening in Bavaria is really that voters don't like hypocrisy and they don't like flip-flops. And that's happened a lot. There's been this sort of appeasement of sort of moving toward Merkel and then moving away. And then Markus Söder, who runs the party now in Bavaria, who is the premier in Bavaria, he's changed course. He's had a very kind of far-right kind of rhetoric, and then all of a sudden realized that was backfiring in the polls, decided to take a different tack and to attack the AfD. And all of that back and forth really makes voters very upset. The person who could benefit from all of this, if things go really south, is Ilse Aigner, who has been a long-time Bavarian politician. She's kept kind of quiet. She's been a little bit in the background. And if the party gets really upset with both Seehofer and Söder, I think Ilse Aigner could come out and be the Bavarian party leader.
That's an interesting one. OK, Matthew has mentioned it already. Bavaria certainly has a lot going for it. It's among the most prosperous parts of Germany. It's got the lowest unemployment, the lowest crime rates. It leads the way on education. It's home to 9 blue-chip companies. It's even recently announced that it has its own space programme. But as Shakespeare might have said, there's something rotten in the state of Bavaria.
It could all be so lovely. Even the rest of the world associates Bavaria with beer, Oktoberfest, Lederhosen, Dirndls, and of course, Bayern Munich, who pretty much always win, normally. Bavaria also stands for BMW, Siemens, high-tech businesses, a natural union of lederhosen and laptops, reaching the top by combining tradition with modernity.
That is still the position of political leaders across the globe. We want to get to where you Bavarians already are. Not Bayern Munich, but the Free State of Bavaria.
It certainly has more to offer than just fairy tale castles and breathtaking landscapes. So why are the Bavarians, of all people, so dissatisfied with their political leaders?
I do want to come back to that question, Matthew, because our viewers abroad will be fascinated by this. It's such a prosperous region of Germany, and they are mightily cheesed off, the people of Bavaria, with their leaders. What's gone wrong? What's the problem there?
Well, I think that there's not just one cause. I think we've talked about some of the reasons. The asylum issue, the refugee issue is one thing, but something that people in Bavaria would say in the CSU is that they've been a victim of their own success in a way, because the prosperity down there has created so many jobs, and you've seen the population go from just over the past few years from 11 to 13 million. So they've really grown quite a lot. But those people have come from other parts of Germany, mainly from the northern regions of Germany, who don't have a natural affinity for the CSU, who didn't grow up with the CSU. It's important to know that the CSU operates a real political machine down there, and they have very close ties to the Catholic Church, and particularly in rural areas, people come up through these organizations, these youth organizations, and it's a way of life. And it's tied to the church, it's tied to the local inn where people meet for their weekly beer and this type of thing. And so there's a real network there, and that will remain. And this is one of the interesting things that will play out in the coming years if this election really is a disaster for them, is are they able to maintain this dominance that they have at the local level, because they also control 2/3 of the local districts there. So, I think though that this idea of it becoming more diverse is something that they and the CSU didn't really realize was happening, and what that would mean, that people from other parts of the country are not in tune with their sort of conservative view of the world.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can also say that the SPD, the Social Democrats, have also lost support in Bavaria. So it really is, I think, the kind of phenomenon that we also saw in Britain with Brexit, that we saw in the United States with the election of Donald Trump, that voters are not happy with politics as, with the status quo, with the way that things have always been. They want change. So you've seen the Freie Wähler, the voters are doing pretty well in the polls.
Free electoral list. Yeah, if you want. Yeah.
Right, and the Greens are doing very well. But those two big, sort of centrist established parties are not.
The parties that are in control in Berlin, and this is sort of...
Exactly.
But
Now, the Greens, we don't have much time, and I really want to know why the Greens are so successful at this point in time. 18%, twice as much as last time
I
round.
think through no merit of their own whatsoever.
Oh.
I think they're just sitting there waiting for everybody else to make mistakes or disillusion their voters or whatever, and they just collect what's left on the floor.
But there are a lot of people, Bettina, who are suddenly talking about a newish option in German politics. We've seen it before at the national level. We've seen it in Baden-Württemberg, neighbouring Bavaria, a conservative green coalition.
Of course we can see that, and we are going to see that, and perhaps in Bavaria too, after the Sunday. But that doesn't mean that the Greens have come up with any startling new policies over the last 12 months.
They're just
that
not
they have
tainted.
great ideas of what to do about all the ills that we see in the world. Nothing. They are really doing nothing, except the others are doing worse than nothing.
Matthew.
And so they benefit.
Well, I think the Greens benefit culturally from the fact that the SPD, the Social Democrats, have this kind of identity crisis at the moment. It's the traditional Labour Party, and a lot of, particularly urban voters who are young professionals, they don't really culturally identify with the SPD. They tend to be, in Bavaria, the offspring of CSU voters. So they come from the same sort of, cultural universe. And so it's not a big leap for people to vote for the Greens down there. That said, I think that you've seen this fracturing of the left as well in Germany since the 1970s, where you used to just have the SPD. The SPD then lost its sort of ecological wing with the Greens, and then it lost its left wing with the Linke, the left party in Germany. So you have, this fracturing of the left, and now you're seeing that also happening on the right with the AfD, and you've got groups like the Freie Wähler and others. And so the question is Germany on its way to becoming a country like Holland, where you have 12, 13 parties, represented, and that could make it in the long term somewhat more difficult to govern, as good as that is for democracy. This period where we've had two-party coalitions maybe coming to an end.
Fascinating thoughts. We've had so many from each of you. We're running out of time. You've got a minute now, Andrea, on where is this going to leave Angela Merkel, this vote on Sunday?
She's going to be weakened. There's really no way to not come out of this a little bit bruised, because it's the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party is not going to do well in Bavaria. It's not going to do well in Hessen. The state of Hessen has an election in 2 weeks. And pressure will mount for Angela Merkel to accelerate her period of succession, to move forward. There'll be a party congress in December. There'll be certainly some challenges. But you know what? Angela Merkel always surprises people, and she is such a scrappy survivor. Yeah. We'll see.
She always comes up trumps, somehow. Bettina, Angela Merkel, where's this going to leave her?
I completely agree. I think Merkel has caused a lot of this by the vacuum that she's left over the past 2 years. We've seen extremely little leadership from her, which has left a lot of room for other people to do this and fight about that. I think should she manage to reinvent herself and come up with a story for Germany that makes sense to people, that explains to them how she sees the country's future, including the 1 million refugees that are living here, then she may pull it off. If she doesn't, I think she'd better start thinking about her succession.
She's looking for a legacy already. Could the legacy be, coming out of this election, that Angela Merkel passes on to her successors, to Germany, to her party, the prospect of a conservative green coalition at the national level, a new blueprint for Germany?
I don't really see that happening, to be honest. I mean, I think that she would like to manage her succession, but we all know what they say about the best laid plans. I think that she's going to lose these elections in the coming months, and there could be a dynamic there where she's just going to not be able to steer the party and Germany in the direction she would like, and she will be pressured to step down at some point, possibly before the the end of the term, or likely before the end of the term. I don't think that these ideas that she's going to be able to nominate somebody as her chosen successor are going to turn out. I think more likely than a Green Conservative coalition would be a Conservative backlash within the CDU, which is its more kind of natural disposition anyway.
OK, thank you all three for joining me here today on Quadriga. It's been a real pleasure. Some great ideas. Hope we've given you at home plenty of food for thought. A watershed for Germany, Bavaria votes. That's been our question here on Quadriga today. If you've enjoyed the show, come back next week. Until then, bye-bye and cheers.